I often get these scenarios in my head and think about how if you combine certain concepts, that you can actually create a story that might influence people to become better in ways that you wouldn't expect them to be able to at this point. I'm speaking specifically about the rich here at this point, the ultra rich, but that was the initial idea behind this story. But I like to help. I like to write all these different parameters for a story, and then have ChatGPT actually write the story for me, even if writing the parameters took longer than the story. So this is a good example of that, where I wrote this lengthy parameters about this story, and then I got ChatGPT to write this story based on those. And so this story is called The Quiet Diagnosis. Chapter 1. The question no one asked. No one remembered the exact moment when the word success began to sound pathological. There was no uprising, no redistribution mobs, no great collapse that forced humanity's hand. There was only a question, asked softly, persistently, until ignoring it became harder than answering it. What happens to a human psyche when accumulation is unlimited and empathy is optional? For centuries, civilization had avoided this question by pretending wealth was neutral, that it merely reflected talent, effort, or destiny. The cost, measured in hunger, ecological collapse, and quiet despair, was treated as unfortunate but unrelated. Well, the Stewardship Circle did not accept that separation. They were an odd assembly, scientists and other people who trusted data over ideology, therapists who understood trauma loops, indigenous elders who measured time in generations, and Aletheia, the first widely trusted artificial intelligence designed not to optimize outcomes, but to diagnose systems. Aletheia had one guiding constraint: do not tell humanity what to do. Oh no. Show humanity what's happening. Chapter 2. Naming the Unnameable. Aletheia began where medicine always begins: pattern recognition. She compared global mental health data, ecological extraction rates, violence indices, and wealth concentration curves. The correlations were impossible to ignore. Extreme wealth accumulation correlated with chronic fear responses, social detachment, distorted moral reasoning, compulsive future hoarding, and an inability to experience sufficiency or safety. The behaviors resembled known disorders, except for one difference. Those patients controlled everything. The circle debated language carefully. Moral condemnation would fail. Economic jargon would anesthetize. Finally, a public health psychiatrist said what many had privately thought: if this behavior were happening in any other scale, we'd call it a disorder. Thus entered the phrase that quietly changed history: pathological resource hoarding syndrome. Not as an insult, as a diagnosis. Chapter 3. The Birth of the Loom. The problem wasn't data. The problem was distance. Charts didn't pierce denial. Statistics didn't bypass identity defenses. People could always say, "That's not me." The breakthrough came from an unexpected place: an old, ethically abandoned neuroscience experiment resurrected with modern safeguards. They called it the loom. As I said, the loom allowed voluntary recording and sharing of embodied conscious experience, not memories as images, but the felt state of being someone, the emotional load, the stress hormones, the attentional narrowing, the relational absence. The loom was not entertainment. It was not coercive. Participation required consent, twice. The first recordings came from people living at the margins. A mother navigating food scarcity, a farmer watching soil fail, a child absorbing constant insecurity. Then came the riskier step. Several ultra-wealthy individuals, curious, defensive, or quietly desperate, agreed to record their own lived experience. What the loom revealed startled everyone. Not pleasure, not peace, but unrelenting vigilance. The fear of losing what had been accumulated, the isolation of being unrelatable, the numbness of excess, the terror that enough might never arrive. The circle didn't narrate this. They let people feel it. That's what the loom was good for. Chapter 4. The moment denial cracked. Millions used the loom, not because they were told to, but because curiosity proved stronger than ideology. People emerged shaken, quiet, altered. The narrative shifted almost overnight. Ultra-wealth was no longer aspirational in the way it once had been. It looked less like freedom and more like a trauma loop with unlimited fuel. Alethea summarized it with clinical precision. Hoarding does not resolve insecurity. It institutionalizes it. For the first time, the world saw that allowing a few to accumulate without limit required structuring deprivation elsewhere, and that those doing the hoarding were not healed by it. They were trapped by it. Chapter 5. Treating the disease, not the symptom. The Stewardship Circle proposed no punishment. They proposed treatment, systemic and personal. First came the sufficiency guarantees. Food, water, shelter, healthcare, education, a meaningful participation in stewardship were all guaranteed. Once survival anxiety dissolved, human behavior changed predictably. Crime dropped, birth outcomes improved, violence declined, creativity surged. Most telling of all, the social obsession with hoarding collapsed. Children learned early that stewardship was not sacrifice, but meaningful connection to land, to people, to purpose. Excess accumulation lost its psychic payoff. Chapter 6. What became of the hoarders? Well, some resisted, loudly, but many, once stripped of the myth that hoarding was virtue, experienced something unexpected. Relief. They were offered care, not condemnation, therapy, not tribunals, and boundaries, not exile. One former magnate, speaking years later, said, I thought having more made me feel safe, but it turns out being connected to people, to land, and to something larger than my fear was what my nervous system had been searching for all my life. Some never healed fully, but none were allowed to structure the world around their illness ever again. Chapter 7. A planet that chose sanity. The world did not become perfect. Humans still argued, storms still came, mistakes still happened. But civilization made a critical adult decision. It stopped confusing pathology with success. Hoarding was no longer admired, excused, or mythologized. It was understood, treated with compassion, constrained with wisdom, and never again rewarded with unchecked power. People tended land. They restored ecosystems. They lived softly, not because they were forced to, but because it felt better. War faded, not from moral enlightenment, but from irrelevance. There was nothing left worth stealing. Final chapter, the diagnosis that saved us. History would later summarize the shift simply. Humanity realized that allowing extreme accumulation was not freedom, it was negligence. negligence toward ecosystems, negligence toward the vulnerable, negligence toward the mentally unwell, empowered to act without limit. Once hoarding was recognized for what it was, a mental health condition magnified by structural permission, the solution became obvious. Not punishment, not worship, but care, boundaries, and a system designed for health. The planet did not become utopia, but it did become sane. And sanity, at last, was enough.